We will begin with Dr. Lorna Waddington, who is a professor at the University at Leeds, followed by Dr. Gregory Stanton, who many of you know by reputation as the founding president of Genocide Watch, and of course from his stages of genocide. And then finally, we will be hearing from Dr. Henry Theriault, and he is joining us as an associate provost at Worcester State University. And with that, it is now 10 o'clock. And Lorna, I pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Kate. So today I'm talking about GenAI and genocide studies. As my bio states, I'm actually an academic integrity expert 1 day a week and historian of genocide and the Holocaust for 4 days a week. So I have a huge interest in the mix of the two. Normally this would take place over an hour, but there's obviously 15 minutes. So excuse me for rushing over some points. I firstly wanted to talk about some of the key concerns: ethical implications, accuracy and reliability, context and understanding for the genocide studies, sensitivity and respect, bias. We'll be talking about what I call the refusal to engage with the G word, and hallucinations. And the first example of the refusal to engage with the G word is when I asked GenAI, this was ChatGPT, for an image to talk about genocide studies for this paper. It refused to give me an image. The only way I could get it to actually produce this image is to say that it was about ethnic cleansing, which is why you see the weird reference to ethical at the bottom and the top right hand corner ethnic. And you can see that GenAI has a lot of spelling mistakes.
Just Lorna, we're not
yes?
seeing your presentation.
Oh, that's a bit strange.
Pardon me for jumping in.
I'm seeing it.
Oh, you are? Okay. I beg your pardon.
All right. Okay. Well. Okay.
Yes,
thank you.
You're good.
So, ethical implications. There are a lot of ethical implications when it comes to genocide studies and AI. It could inadvertently trivialize, misrepresent historical facts. This could be deeply harmful, disrespectful to survivors, descendants of genocide victims. Also, obviously extends to the potential misuse of AI-generated data for propaganda or revisionist purposes, and also content restrictions. We don't always know what GenAI will actually let us see. And again, this picture, I asked it to give me a balance between AI and genocide, and it refused to put genocide on the scale. So I ended up with ethics again. Accuracy and reliability. A lot of people aren't really aware of just how large language models work. So the content isn't always accurate or reliable. What it does is it's generated on the basis of algorithms and on the basis of reliability. And so in the context of genocide studies, ensuring the factual accuracy is absolutely paramount. Misinformation, historical inaccuracies can perpetrate false narratives. And what I've given you here, if you see on the right-hand side, this was a question that I asked ChatGPT. I teach about Nazi Germany, and I asked it to account for fluctuations in Japanese-German relations in the Second World War. And you can see what it says here. Japan only entered the war after America attacked its naval base at Pearl Harbor. Now, this is something that I talk about with the students, and it's a really interesting example because obviously the algorithm has Japan, America, naval base, attack Pearl Harbor. In this instance, this is the message that it came up with for the students. ChatGPT invents, we refer to it as hallucinations. So for example, this UNESCO recent report talked about ChatGPT inventing the idea of Holocaust by drowning. And what had happened here is ChatGPT had used the phrase Holocaust by bullets and somehow came up with this idea that there were many killings via drowning. So obviously, it serves as a constant warning about caution about using forms of GenAI as factual information. Contextual, I mean, the whole point about my presentation is the good, the bad, the ugly. So there is good. And one of the things I did want to say is it can provide useful contextual understanding. So on the right-hand side, I'd asked, this was ChatGPT, to give me some background to the Guatemalan genocide. You know, most of my students haven't really heard much about it. And it provided quite a useful summary, I would say. But if you see under number 2, the international national judgments, it's come up with this reference, OD and PL. Now, interestingly, this is this is at the University of Leeds. It's a staff development section that's absolutely nothing to do with Guatemala, genocide, or anything like that. So ChatGPT has hallucinated a reference, and one that's very close to home to me. We'll have all seen one of the problems with ChatGPT is incorrect citations. ChatGPT 4 had a lot of incorrect citations. The new version 4.0 has more normal citations, but you might also have seen that Taylor and Francis have just sold all of their works to enable GenAI to learn from books produced by academics. The other context as well that I wanted to talk about as well, I was asking about Hitler's prophecy speech that he talks about in January 1939, and he talks about if there should be a world war, it would lead to the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. You'll see from the review, it's kind of okay, but it misses out quite a lot of important things. First of all, the problem with the German version of annihilation, but secondly, it fails to offer the context that in January 1939, Hitler had already decided on war. The question was who he was going to move against, but war was there. And so this sort of like context and lack of context is important. Sensitivity and respect. I asked GenAI to give me its own guidelines, and you'll see on the right-hand side, it did come out with some, you know, sort of useful filters that it employs about avoiding harmful stereotypes, human reviews, responses involving sensitive topics are guided by principles. But there are a few problems with this. GenAI may not always adhere to these standards, and the content restriction also has its own concerns, especially where GenAI lies. I say lies because obviously it doesn't, but it does actually present false information. There's also another concern about, with these restrictions, about EDI concerns for students of genocide studies. For example, I wanted to digitize documents to make it more available for students with different abilities, and it wouldn't actually let me do it because it's to do with Nazi Germany. I often get access denied. So in this particular case, this was from Gemini. I asked Gemini to look at Hitler's Hossbach memorandum and not to involve race, but to involve anti-British views. And you can see the message is, I don't have the capacity to help with that, but it does. What it's done is it's restricting the content. And one of my huge, huge concerns, ethical concerns with the various LLMs that I'm looking at is these kind of messages where it's not accurately reflecting its ability to do or not do things. This was really interesting to me. So as part of this digitization of documents for my students, I asked it to digitize a memorandum of Hitler speaking with military officials once war had started. And if you look, On the left-hand side, it started to digitize the document. I was hugely excited. I thought this will transform my teaching for this particular module. I can use it with Rwanda, all sorts of different things. And then suddenly, ... it replaced that information with, I'm unable to help. I'm only a language model. I don't have the ability to process. But you can see from my screenshots, it absolutely had the ability to process. Even then, the fact is that there's implicit bias. So it comes back to a group of people from a certain country will have implicit and explicit bias. So the refusal to engage with the G word, this has been the bane of my research over the last few months. It's really important as educators and for students to realize the limitations. The same goes for the reluctance to discuss most things related to the Nazis. So on the right-hand side, I asked GenAI to give me a generic photograph of a Nazi rally. So it says, I'm only a language model, can't do it. Can you provide an image of Regent Park? Yes, it can do it. One of the things that I have found in the research is different apps will give you different results sometimes. So like Gemini, ChatGPT, so it's important you get to know the different apps. Here, I'll just miss over this. This is back to Hitler's Gemlich letter. It won't actually quote me the letter, but in this case, it would actually synthesize it. This was Gemini, whereas ChatGPT won't do this. I also wanted to show you the opening picture that I had for the refusal to use a G word. I actually wanted to add the title GenAI and Genocide Studies, and it said no. It wouldn't do it. So I had to then change it to GenAI G Studies, which sounds a bit weird, but it would actually do it for me then. And again, it's just another good example about this problem with the G word. So finally, using GenAI ethically in education, you have to think about the learning objectives and outcomes, what skills the students are needed to demonstrate at the end of it, methods of assessment. This is a history perspective, and we have clear guidelines as to what our students should be able to do. Evaluate primary sources, appreciate complexity, understand the problems with the records. So clearly, history students' critical skills are very important in the GenAI world, which is why I have this picture of a historian with superpowers. Methods of assessment are important. All of the ones on the left can be completed by using GenAI. So as educators, it's something to be aware of. There's a picture there of a deepfake video that I made of myself speaking in fluent French Canadian, which it generated from me talking about June, the novel, for 5 minutes into a camera, and the whole thing was fabricated. So you should discuss the use of GenAI with students, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You should talk about the hallucinations, the false references, ChatGPT's own warning. Something I find extremely fun with students is to ask them to provide their own examples. So, in one of the seminars, we will spend an hour looking at this. We also use examples of essay generated by GenAI. Students mark the essay, and the essay is always a fail, which is a really important lesson for the students. You're better. Your outputs are better than those produced by GenAI. One thing I wanted to show that I do with the students is in the mock-up. This was a report on Waddington, Thurio, and Stanton's moon landing in June 2024. This is what produced by ChatGPT. Apparently, I was there planting the IAGS conference flag for 2027. So Mel, if you're still here. So conclusion, student skills remain critical. We shouldn't see it as a threat. GenAI does pose a greater challenge, but has great opportunities. Same outcome, different means, and finally have fun. And that's me done.
That is perfect. Thank you so much, Lorna. And so just as a note for everyone, we will be taking questions at the end of each session. And you can go ahead and put them into the Q&A box at any time. We will not be able to respond to raised hand gestures in the chat box. So once again, please direct everything into the Q&A box.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. And today I'd like to talk to you about a positive use of AI. And it's to outline a project that Genocide Watch, the Alliance Against Genocide, is undertaking right now. And that is to use AI to answer hate speech. There's been a lot of studies of how hate speech should be addressed. And one of the conclusions of these studies is that taking it down is not very effective, because by the time it is taken down, it's usually too late. It's already gone viral. Now, as you know, Facebook has instituted a review board, and they have done so in order to address a lot of the damage that Facebook has done over the years, especially in Myanmar, especially in Ethiopia, and it's continuing. The problem is that the review board, and I've been following its work quite closely, is always too late. It's too slow. So I was thinking, what could be fast enough? And then I realized it's AI. Only AI is fast enough to deal with hate speech. But should it take the hate speech down? Is that the most effective way to deal with it? And I really concluded finally that the best way to deal with hate speech is to answer it almost immediately. Now, the best example of that wasn't using AI at all. It was used in Kenya. In fact, Alison Nderitu, who's our special advisor for the Ministry of Genocide, was one of the people who initiated this project in Kenya. What they did in Kenya was they recruited a huge number of people to follow all the social media. And when hate speech would come up, or when other kinds of disinformation or other things that would incite people to engage in violence, it would be immediately answered by these people who were monitoring the social media. And it worked. It was a huge impact. In other words, they, I think, were a major factor in making the 2017 elections in Kenya not result in genocidal violence. So what does this teach us then? It teaches us that AI could be even more effective, because AI is instantaneous. It can be programmed, it can be trained in many, many languages, and it can, in other words, deal with the hate speech as soon as it comes up. As you know, the need for this is huge. In Myanmar, Facebook facilitated the spread of hate speech and incitement, and it led almost directly to the Rohingya genocide and the forced displacement of over 1 million refugees. Now, we still have, as you know, hundreds of thousands of refugees in camps in Bangladesh. Currently, Meta and WhatsApp are currently being used to spread hate speech and incitements to hate crimes in India. WhatsApp is being used to spread the conspiracy theory of love jihad, which portrays every mixed marriage as an insidious conspiracy that threatens the purity of Hinduism. It's an electrical charge intended to polarize Indian Hindus and Muslims against each other. And one of the things I found out in researching this was absolutely shocking. Kidnapped Yazidi women are still being sold by ISIS on Facebook today. Now, Rohingya and Yazidi plaintiffs and lawyers in Bangladesh and France are filing lawsuits to hold Meta accountable for its role in these genocides. Taking out a giant organization like Meta will require enormous resources. And it may take such lawsuits to hold Meta, X, and other social media accountable for publishing hate speech on their platforms. Not every country has something like we have in the United States with the Communications Decency Act, which basically grants immunity to these social media platforms. And these lawsuits may, in fact, be useful in getting damages that could hold Meta and other social media accountable. But it may be that lawsuits are not the best way to convince Meta, X, and other social media to respond to hate speech. I'm convinced that Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, even Elon Musk, and their employees do not really want to be complicit in genocide. They just want to maximize use of their platforms and increase their profits. Now, one of the failures of Meta, X, Google, YouTube, and other social media is that their owners are often absolutists about free speech. They do not seem to understand that incitement to genocide or to commit any crime is not protected speech. Now, this review board, as I said, that Meta has appointed is too slow. It's well-intentioned, but it's too slow. The solution is to instantly answer hate speech, and only AI is fast enough to do that. The Genocide Watch proposal to do this is that we are proposing to start negotiations with the executives who control the artificial corporations to jointly establish a nonprofit corporation that will build, train, and reach agreements, and that will build media platforms to answer hate speech. Now, these AI programs would be trained to recognize hate speech and incitement in hundreds of languages. AI software that can recognize hate speech in hundreds of languages will cost billions of dollars. Founding and running this corporation will require the enormous resources of OpenAI, Anthropos, Google, X, Microsoft, and Facebook. Only the giant IT companies have the money necessary to finance this project. So our next step is to convince the owners of social media companies to incorporate such software into their platforms and to jointly found a corporation that will produce the AI that is necessary to answer hate speech. It will be a joint venture because the companies themselves will have to adopt what it produces. Now, this project will be organized by Genocide Watch and the Alliance Against Genocide, and we hope with other major institutions, and will work in conjunction with the AI and social media companies that will own and invest in this nonprofit corporation. The Alliance, AI, and social media companies and their associated law and venture capital firms have the legal skills and international organizational and financial networks to launch this corporation. Now, the Alliance Against Genocide is uniquely qualified to propose this project to the Silicon Valley corporations. The Alliance has 119 member organizations in 31 countries. Its member organizations have hundreds of staff at 60 more, and their staff speak most of the world's major languages. The Alliance will work with social media companies themselves to build this corporation. They are the only companies with the global capacity and financial resources to build and staff this AI corporation. The corporation will be funded by investments, not by donations. Although it will be a nonprofit, it will be run like an ordinary software company by business professionals. And its products will need to be adopted by AI and social media companies themselves at the cost of producing them. This huge reach will be necessary because the AI programs will have to be trained in hundreds of languages. The Alliance is a partnership with the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, which has members from many of the world's religious denominations, including the Roman Catholic Church, which has churches in nearly every country. And churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples of the world's religions have hundreds of thousands of priests, pastors, rabbis, imams, and staff in every country. We will seek help from the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, we've already talked to Pope Francis about this, from the World Council of Churches, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Chinese, and African traditional leaders, as well as from unaffiliated or non-religious academics, ethicists, social scientists, business people, and of course, AI experts. The corporation will recruit the staff that will train the AI software to recognize and answer hate speech. Now, this AI programming and this corporation will have to be voluntarily incorporated into dozens of social media platforms. The AI Corporation will be a joint venture of the AI and social media companies brought together by Genocide Watch, the Alliance Against Genocide, and other anti-genocide organizations if they would like to join us. Genocide Watch has already written articles of incorporation and bylaws for this joint venture corporation. Remember, I was once a corporate lawyer. This is not hard for me. And Genocide Watch is also approaching a number of very powerful international institutions to help us found this nonprofit anti-genocide AI corporation with the creators and owners of the major social media platforms and AI software companies. AI could make social media a guardian rather than a threat to mankind. People have asked us how Genocide Watch has accomplished so much on so little money over the years. We spend about $6,000 a year. And the reason is Genocide Watch has been effective because we know where to put our hands on the levers that move the world. And I hope you'll help move the world with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanton. I know that your words resonate with so many who are with us today. And with that, we will transition to our next presenter.
Thank you to the organizers, especially Kate, Kim, and Lorna for all their work in putting this important conference together and for giving me a humble opportunity to add a very small amount to two very important presentations that have already happened on the panel. In the past 2 years, new generative AI technologies have entered the mainstream of academia. Though innovative, positive uses of these new technologies have been blossoming, their emergence has caused great concern for the future of teaching. Platforms such as ChatGPT can produce essays on a host of topics. While detection tools exist, they are not adequate to identifying all misuses of generative AI. Some in academia see this as a crisis. One approach to the threat of academic dishonesty has been to ban the use of generative AI entirely. This can be accompanied by a return to traditional pen and paper exams in the classroom and other generative AI proof assignment techniques. Another approach has been to authorize the use of AI in specific and controlled ways. It should be noted that until some point in the spring of 2023, a professor could simply query ChatGPT to ask if it had written a given text, and ChatGPT would actually say if it did. This no longer happens. While those teaching on genocide are in a very similar position regarding new generative AI technology to others in academia, it is helpful to have a genocide studies focused discussion about integrating generative AI into the classroom. This presentation will offer some possible approaches to assignments for genocide studies courses from the perspective of an instructor who is a novice regarding generative AI. It is not intended as an expert viewpoint, but rather to offer some possibly useful approaches and to foster discussion among genocide studies scholars about generative AI use in their teaching. Due to my own as yet nascent engagement with generative AI, which has been limited to ChatGPT, ChatGPT will be the model of generative AI used in this presentation. I will begin with some clarifying comments about what generative AI can and cannot do. As my colleague at Worcester State University, English professor Don Vecchio, has put it, it can be helpful to view generative AI platforms such as ChatGPT as very powerful search engines that can identify and sophisticatedly organize, and represent information available on the internet relevant to a queried topic. ChatGPT not only finds information as a traditional search engine does, but it takes information from multiple sources and collates it into what are in effect reports on the queried topic. What is more, follow-up queries can elicit additions to initial responses that offer new material that addresses shortcomings in earlier reporting. A number of limitations exist. First, generative AI is not creative in the sense of producing new insights based on existing information and ideas. In this way, it can serve as an excellent support tool for research, but cannot produce truly original concepts, theories, etc. that go beyond what scholars have already generated. It appears, however, to be able to apply existing concepts, methods, and approaches to new sets of data, new topics, and so forth, which is a higher order function and does produce what could be considered original material. Of course, this does not necessarily result in good scholarship as we would define it. Other limitations can be shown through the use of an example. Here's a topic that I queried ChatGPT about. While I will not analyze it in detail, on the next slide, you will see the response ChatGPT provided. And here's the slide. Identify two elements of Locke's account of property as presented in Chapter 5 of his second treatise of government that illustrate Anne Waters' explanation of discrete binary dualism as presented in her essay, Language Matters. While most audience members are likely familiar with John Locke and the theory of property he developed, which continues to dominate in Western political and legal structures, fewer are likely familiar with Native American philosopher Anne Waters' Language Matters, a metaphysic of non-discrete, non-binary dualism, which she first published in 2001 in the American Philosophical Association newsletter on American Indians and Philosophy, and later in her edited collection, American Indian Thought. In this article, she argues for an alternative to Western exclusivist binary dualism based on more complex approaches to dualism in some Native American traditions. The responses returned to the first inquiry and subsequent attempts to elicit further clarifications treat Waters' concept as a generic notion of opposition between distinct categories. While this is part of what she means, her theory focuses particularly on oppositions that have social import, such as cultural, geographical, gendered, and racial categorization schemes. What is more, the key element of her theory is that when such oppositions are between discrete categories that exhaust the possibilities, there is a tendency to turn this opposition into a hierarchy. Thus, it is not just that masculine and feminine, European and indigenous North American, etc. are distinct, but the former of each pair is seen as superior to the latter of each pair. ChatGPT's concept of water stops at a generic notion of dualism, such as the opposition between individually held private property and communal property. ChatGPT might be right to point out that Waters sees such oppositions as reductive, but it fails to get to the key point, and the reason why I would assign the Locke reading and this topic in a genocide studies course in the first place, that Locke assumes or argues for a hierarchy of private property over communal property and sees this as justifying European ownership of land occupied by indigenous North Americans, thereby authorizing the dispossession of indigenous peoples. In formulating its answers, ChatGPT does not appear to go beyond the terms presented in the query for Waters, discrete, binary, dualism, and language. This is not dissimilar from tendencies of some student paper writers to attempt what might be termed a Kantian analytic approach, whereby an answer is based on what is presented in the question, rather than the synthetic approach that would introduce new information based on knowledge gained through reading course material and doing outside research. While Waters' paper is available on the internet, it is not used in any kind of specific fashion, quite different from Chapter 5 of Locke's second treatise, which of course is readily available on the internet and also well commented upon in the philosophical literature that's available on the internet. While this is not evidence in this case, another issue is that ChatGPT will actually make up sources that fit the context. And of course, Lorna already spoke about this. It also uses speculative language to fill in gaps in its own analysis. In this example, we see the formulation, Waters might argue that. What follows is an inadequate account of what Waters might actually say about this issue, which is a real problem. Finally, ChatGPT's answers are often shallow, providing a general overview of a topic, but not going into the kind of depth that we really want our students to engage. These shortcomings actually provide an interesting opportunity for teaching with AI. This is a glass half full approach, I think. One can ask students to identify the kinds of shortcomings that I've listed above. And here are some examples of questions that might be used. Based on the course readings and what you've learned in the course, explain 3 ways in which the ChatGPT answer returned on a particular query is inadequate or otherwise flawed. Use one quotation from one of the unit readings in this part of your paper. And the quotations are important because they bring the students back to the work that they're supposed to be doing that goes beyond what ChatGPT offers. Identify a relevant component of a good answer that was not included in the ChatGPT answer, a component that comes from one of the assigned readings. Explain that component and why it is part of a good answer to the topic. Use, again, one quotation from the reading you have drawn the component from. Evaluate the ChatGPT answer. This is a little more general and requires a little bit more sophisticated approach. Overall, is it a good answer? Explain why or why not, drawing attention to at least one important strength or weakness of the ChatGPT answer in this part of your paper. Again, use a quotation to tie this back to what you're supposed to be reading. The goal of these topics is to guide students to not only critically evaluate the ChatGPT answers to topics, but to return to the actual assigned readings themselves to generate their own answers or evaluative points, thereby helping them appreciate their own abilities and capacities. By analyzing ChatGPT answers and identifying shortcomings, they could develop a more sophisticated understanding of the writing of academic analyses and develop their skills in this regard further. As you might have noticed, these topics do leave space for academic dishonesty. ChatGPT can easily be used to generate critiques of what it itself produced. That's why I would take another approach in thinking about how to formulate assignments. This would be to avoid separating ChatGPT from non-ChatGPT sections of assignments and instead invite the use of ChatGPT freely in constructing assignments. However, to make this effective pedagogically, the instructor should start with teaching students about the shortcomings of ChatGPT and being explicit about the standard of assignments, including such things as the following. Papers must be specific to the text in question and go into appropriate detail. Papers must use terms in the readings in the specific ways they are used in the readings, not in generic ways. And from a philosophical standpoint, this can be quite a demanding expectation. Papers must show an awareness of the content of the relevant readings, and so forth. In this way, students cannot rely on answers from ChatGPT, but can at best use them as departure points or frameworks for adding course-specific work and critically engaging them as part of a process of developing better answers themselves. So far, I have not seen evidence that ChatGPT can perform such a function as that kind of level of improvement, because its initial limits are generally retained even when it is queried to critique its own answers. Through this type of assignment, students can still apply and develop skills in critical analysis of ChatGPT and other responses given to topics, but they can also learn, this is actually important for many of our students, can also learn to use generative AI tools in conjunction with their own higher level academic skills. This can not only address the academic honesty concern, but can also provide an opportunity for a marketable skill development in AI use. While the approaches discussed in this presentation can certainly be used for topics other than genocides, the development of critical information literacy, which includes attention to possible fabrication of sources, is especially important for genocide studies. They provide students opportunities to develop critical analytical skills that are applicable not only to AI-generated material, but other discussions of genocide. While the prevalence and ease of denial of actual genocides and fabrication of false genocides, with the prevalence of denial and fabrication, the importance of checking sources and using genuine critical skills in evaluating what is presented as authoritative is a valuable element of any genocide studies education. While this can go to the extreme where students begin to question even good scholarship on genocide, even there, the fact that students do not take anything on faith, but develop the habit of questioning is ultimately useful. There is a further interesting feature of ChatGPT for at least some cases. When queried about the Holocaust, Armenian genocide, Bangladesh genocide, 2000s Darfur genocide, and even Native American genocides in general, the answers returned do seem to reflect what I would consider general scholarly views that are prevalent in our field. In this way, ChatGPT is different from the open internet in that there are guardrails set up to prevent genocide denial from skewing or affecting what is provided to students. At the same time, in cases where ChatGPT is not able to determine a consensus on true or dubious on a true or dubious claim of genocide, it might default to a relativistic approach that in effect grants legitimacy to the denial or fabrication. This is where instructor guidance becomes crucial, and this is the point I want to end with. ChatGPT and other AI tools are not standalone products, and this is the key thing for students to understand, is that there is a function for instructors, there's a function for what's happening in the classroom that at this point at least cannot be addressed, fulfilled, or otherwise completed through use of these kinds of AI tools. And that's where the instructor, in some sense, becomes crucial in a new way that might not have been true 10 or 20 years ago. I hope that this very basic discussion has been useful. In the question and answer period, I would invite audience members to consider other ways that the features of generative AI I have sketched have relevance and utility specifically in genocide studies. Again, we can see how this works, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Theriault. That was helpful, informative, specific, great concrete. So right now we don't have questions in the chat box, but I do have a question that I've gotten via text message asking Lorna to talk more, if she would, about how you're having students, the process of having students evaluate AI work in your class setting. And you'd mentioned having them grade an AI paper, I believe.
Well, this is level 1 students that are our first year students, and we do, as part of the sort of like history, sort of academic skills, we actually have them look at former students' essays to grade them. So, you know, were they I don't know if you have the same sort of first class, second class, but there's a clear marking criteria. So students go through former students' essays that, you know, they've given us the permission and mark them. And it's just a really useful discussion to see what lecturers are looking for. So we've now added some GenAI essays. So the students don't know which are the GenAI essays. And I can tell you that 100% over the last year and a half, the students have failed all of the GenAI essays. And it's like I said, it's huge for the students' confidence to know that a generic student at the University of Leeds can do better than GenAI can. So it's just a really important teaching tool.
Thank you for that response. We have a question from Michael, who's asking if we've had any success with quoting, citing, and or referencing. Is there success with generative AI? And that's for anyone in the group.
I would say at the University of Leeds, this is more about academic integrity. We have what we call a traffic light system. So some assessments you can't use GenAI, some you actually can use GenAI. Where it's been used successfully is more of a sounding board. You know, like how I said about the overview of the Guatemalan genocide. But the fact that I found really useful is to say to the students, you have to read, you have to, you know, check out the sources. You can't get away with asking GenAI, which is why the Pearl Harbor example is so useful, because I say to them, if you've asked GenAI something about, say, Guatemala, the Herero genocide, that you don't know the facts, it might give you the equivalent of America bombed Japanese fleets at Pearl Harbor. If you've not done the research and the work, you wouldn't know it was wrong.
Thank you very much. And Colleen Worrell is asking if you can send your slides via, asking about slide sharing. So Kim will be, she has all of the slide presentations. We will consult with presenters to see about of sharing of those presentations with the wider audience. And so you can email her at kim@eihr.org for that information. And Colleen is also asking if Dr. Stanton could share a resource that describes the work Genocide Watch is doing on the joint AI venture, and asks how students might be involved in the work.
Sure. We are really only getting this project underway. We have started to approach some pretty important international institutions about this. I think I mentioned that we talked to the Pope already, but I mean, there are many other people. And in terms of getting students involved, I think they will be a huge help to us. For one thing, it'll be students around the world, because we will need to come up with answers for hate speech in hundreds of languages. And I can imagine that with the resources that students could bring to this, they may be much more aware sometimes than even their teachers about the kinds of euphemisms and other things that are being used to spread hate speech. And so I actually think that students can really play a big role in this. In fact, in Kenya, for example, the example I used, students were involved in answering hate speech, and it was quite effective. So thanks.
Can you think, so most of you are speaking to university level students. So Henry, I'm going to toss this one to you. Could you think about how this might be applicable in a secondary setting?
Oh no, thank you for that question, and it's really important, especially given our excellent keynote address this morning. And I would say all these things depend on the specifics of the students, the classes, their background and so forth. So not all secondary students are the same, not all courses are the same, and not all motivations are the same. So for instance, in a university setting, you might be doing general education courses where students might encounter genocide issues but not be that particularly motivated to deal with them. And so you wouldn't be able to do that much advanced work, even in the ways that I was suggesting. But at a secondary level, certainly many students, especially those who are self-selected into these kinds of courses, would really be able to take on the kinds of topics that I'm suggesting. And I think generationally, many of them have already started to develop very critical approaches to at least social media, the internet, and so forth. And I think that's important. But beyond that, I do think that our keynote made the very important point that age appropriateness is also a key factor, talking about sexualized violence and so forth. And so I would add that, just thinking about what level of work students have done that would be appropriate, and what assignments would be appropriate to that. So very basic critical thinking might be appropriate to early secondary. I hope that helps.
I think that does. Thank you very much. I also have a question from one of our panelists, or one of our team here, Dr. Noor, who asks, what ethical considerations should be taken into account when deploying AI technologies for genocide prevention, particularly regarding data privacy and the potential for misuse?
I will have a stab at answering that. One of my really big concerns is trying to find out, how I talked about the problem of using the G word, reminded me of Shelley from the American State Department about the Rwandan genocide. How many acts of genocide does it take to make a genocide? But what I would say is one of the problems is we don't know what considerations they're taking into account. And so I think it's ChatGPT had the so-called red team, it was a team of individuals who would be deciding. And I've spoken to quite a few experts in this area on LLMs, and Google, ChatGPT, Gemini are very secretive. So in answer to Taweed's question, what we think should be taken into consideration is one thing. To my mind, the big problem is we don't know what the LLMs, what the companies are taking into account, which accounts for the skewed information at times, how I can get a synopsis of Hitler's hate speech in 1919 to Gemlich, but another LLM says it's not there. I can't tell you how hugely excited I was with this, because the Rwandan transcripts from RTML, I actually wanted GenAI to translate for me. And I was thinking I could use this, positive ways to talk about it with the students. The same with documents in German, get them translated. So I'm a sci-fi fan. I'm very sort of like Star Trek, Doctor Who and everything. And in some ways, GenAI is way too limited for me. I am really very much looking forward to the next iteration. But Talweed raises a really important point, and I think it's something that IAGS, we should maybe start approaching these type of companies to get our input as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the whole issue of data privacy and misuse of information, yeah, I think that's a vital topic for us to be putting into consideration. Dr. Stanton, Dr. Terrio, did either of you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I do. I think it is vital that privacy be protected, and that AI could be a real tool for people who don't want to protect privacy. So it's really something we really need to keep tabs on when the AI companies, develop their programs. I don't quite know how to do that institutionally. I mean, that's my kind of thing. I mean, I would try to set up something that would make it work. But I mean, one of the ways they currently do it, as I was saying in my talk, is too slow. A review board is too slow. But in terms of privacy, I think there must be ways to do with it. And I bet, these companies, the social media companies and AI companies have the skill and the expertise to suggest ways to do that.
Do any of you know if X ever reinstated their review board? As I recall, that was essentially either reduced to being meaningless or removed altogether.
That's right. It was practically emptied out by Musk, but Facebook still has it.
Okay. All right.
So the only thing I would add to the comments on privacy is that maybe we're in a time of reframing. I think historically we've been more worried about freedom of speech, right? The suppression of speech. And we're in an era now where we're worried about, just thinking about Taylor and Francis, right? Scholarly work sort of being taken out of the control of the scholars who produce it and so forth. And the way in which anything about you can be put on the, internet, all these kinds of things. And so maybe it's less about freedom of speech versus privacy and just more about agency over what exists about you and about what you're being victimized, through and so forth. Particularly for victims of genocide, but also for others. So maybe that's a way we can start to reframe this and rethink this, because I think, maybe it was Greg that said this, that a lot of folks are free speech absolutists, and maybe that just doesn't make sense anymore in the way that we're trying to frame these questions.
Well, it's difficult to do if it's, is it free speech if it's not? Well, the Supreme Court in the United States says that corporations count as have free speech. Let's put it that way. Entities that can have free speech. So would we say that would apply to AI? I mean, that might be an interesting question to explore.
And AI will be owned by corporations. That is one of the strange aspects of this whole, this whole realm of the internet. Because these social media and so forth, they're owned privately. They can do things that governments can't do about taking down, for instance, right now, taking down hate speech and so forth. And that is why I proposed that a better way to handle hate speech is, in fact, to answer it. And that's why we want to get these types of things not taken down, but rather answered. And using the religious institutions of the world, I think, could become very powerful.
And we do have a couple questions coming in now all at once, of course, in the way that we do in the Q&A box. And we'll take them as we only have time probably for one of them. And so we have a question asking if AI can be trained to effectively handle genocide denial, or is that too tall an order? So maybe Lorna, you might have a thought on that given what you discussed.
The fact is, the LLMs aren't capable of human reasoning. They produce human-like responses, but they're more based on, sort of like, well, it's an algorithm. So you cannot expect an AI to reason the same way that a human can reason. So I would say that is quite problematic, but obviously, sort of Greg's initiative is working along different lines.
Very good. Thank you all very much. We are at time.